The world sees war as a conflict of ideologies, a battle between good and evil, or a struggle for freedom. But if you strip away the flags, the patriotism, and the political rhetoric, what are you left with? You are left with a balance sheet. War is not an event. War is an economy.
My name is David Packows, and I'm an international arms dealer.
This is the fundamental thesis of the story we are auditing today. It is a story about how the machinery of the United States military-industrial complex was hacked by two stoners from Miami. In the mid-2000s, while the public was debating the morality of the Iraq War, a massive river of cash was flowing from the Pentagon to private contractors. The movie opens with a cold, hard calculation. It tells us that it costs $17,500 to outfit one American soldier. That includes the M4 rifle, the Kevlar vest, the helmet, the night vision goggles. But that is just the retail price. The real cost, the cost to the taxpayer, is exponentially higher because every single component is marked up by a chain of middlemen. We begin our forensic analysis with David Packows. Before he was an international arms dealer, he was a massage therapist living in Miami Beach. This detail is crucial not for character development, but for financial context. David represents the zero on the balance sheet. He is struggling to make ends meet, investing his life savings into a failed business selling high thread count bed sheets to retirement homes. This is a classic example of poor capital allocation. He is targeting a market with low liquidity and high skepticism. While David is literally massaging the feet of the wealthy to pay his rent, the real economy of war is exploding in the background. The visual timeline jumps to a funeral. This is our inciting incident. David reconnects with his childhood friend, Efraim Diveroli. If David is the risk-averse everyman, Efraim is the embodiment of unregulated capitalism. He drives a used luxury car, wears a gold Star of David, and carries himself with the unearned confidence of a hedge fund manager. Efraim Diveroli is not a soldier. He is an arbitrageur. He invites David back to his office, which is essentially a messy apartment with a laptop and a bong. This is the headquarters of AEY Incorporated. To the untrained eye, it looks like a frat house. To a forensic auditor, it is a shell company designed for high-velocity transactions. Efraim explains his business model using a metaphor that perfectly describes the U.S. government procurement system: crumbs. Here is the mechanism. The Pentagon awards billions of dollars in massive contracts to giants like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. These are the whole pies. But the government also has thousands of smaller orders: ammunition for the Iraqi police, helmets for the Afghan Army. These orders are too small for the big defense contractors to care about. They are the crumbs. But in a trillion-dollar war economy, a crumb can be worth millions. Efraim utilizes a public website called FedBizOpps. This is a real government database where federal agencies post procurement solicitations. Anyone with an internet connection can view them. Most people see boring government forms. Efraim sees a goldmine of inefficiency. He bids on contracts that are under the radar. Orders for $50,000, $100,000, sometimes a few million. He acts as a broker. He finds cheap surplus weapons in Eastern Europe and sells them to the Pentagon at a markup. He never sees the weapons. He only moves the paperwork. The genius of this scheme lies in its simplicity. The U.S. government, desperate to arm its allies in the Middle East, lowered its vetting standards. They needed weapons fast, and they didn't care who supplied them. AEY Incorporated was perfectly positioned to exploit this lack of oversight. Efraim brings David into the fold, not out of friendship, but because he needs a partner who is malleable. David is broke, his girlfriend is pregnant, and he is desperate. This makes him the perfect accomplice for a high-risk venture. Efraim shows David the math. He pulls up a contract on FedBizOpps. It is a request for Beretta pistols for the police in Baghdad. Efraim knows he can source these pistols from a shady supplier in Italy for a fraction of the price the government is willing to pay. The spread, the difference between the buy price and the sell price, is pure profit. There is no inventory cost, no R&D cost, and minimal overhead. It is pure arbitrage. However, there is a catch. To operate in this gray market, you have to deal with people the U.S. government cannot publicly acknowledge. We are talking about blacklisted arms dealers, corrupt generals, and shell companies registered in tax havens. As David joins AEY, he steps out of the civilian world and into a shadow economy where the only law is, don't get caught. The movie portrays this as a fun, rock and roll adventure. But as auditors, we must look at the documents. The contracts they are bidding on are governed by strict federal laws, including the Berry Amendment and various arms embargoes. Every bid they submit carries a certification that they are complying with these laws. As we will see, Efraim Diveroli views these certifications not as legal binding agreements, but as obstacles to be circumvented. This sets the stage for their first major deal. They aren't just selling sheets anymore, they are selling the instruments of death, and the US taxpayer is footing the bill. The transition is complete. David has moved from the low-margin service industry to the high-stakes world of government contracting fraud. We are now moving into the operational phase of the audit. Part 1 was about the setup. Part 2 is about the execution, and more importantly, the logistical nightmare that defines the international arms trade. Their first major contract seems straightforward on paper. Deliver several thousand Beretta 92 FS pistols to the Iraqi police force. The contract value is significant, the margin is healthy, and the buyer is the United States government. What could go wrong? In the world of logistics, everything. The movie presents a plot twist. Italy, the country of origin for the Berettas, has blocked the shipment to Iraq. This is our first lesson in international trade compliance. Efraim and David thought they were just moving boxes. In reality, they were navigating a minefield of geopolitical treaties. The Italian government refused to sanction a direct shipment to a war zone. This is a common regulatory choke point known as an end-user certificate issue. Faced with a defaulted contract, most legitimate businessmen would declare force majeure and exit. But Efraim Diveroli operates on a different frequency. He proposes a solution that borders on smuggling, transshipment. They decide to fly the cargo to Jordan, a neutral third party, and then truck it across the border into Iraq. In the logistics industry, this is often a red flag for money laundering or sanctions evasion. By adding a stopover, you obscure the origin and the destination, breaking the direct chain of custody. The cargo lands in Jordan, but it gets seized immediately. The movie dramatizes this as a tense standoff with Jordanian customs. Financially speaking, this is a liquidity crisis. Their capital, the guns, is frozen. Every day those guns sit in a warehouse, AEY is bleeding money. Penalties for late delivery are racking up, and their entire business model is at risk of insolvency. This forces our two executives to leave the safety of Miami and fly to Amman, Jordan. This brings us to a critical divergence between the Hollywood narrative and the forensic truth. In the film, this trip is portrayed as a buddy road trip meets action movie. They arrive in Jordan, bribe a customs official, hire a local smuggler named Marlboro, and personally escort the truck through the Triangle of Death to Baghdad. Let's audit this sequence carefully. First, the bribe. Efraim hands a wad of cash to a Jordanian officer. In the eyes of the U.S. Department of Justice, this is a textbook violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA. The FCPA prohibits U.S. citizens from bribing foreign officials to obtain or retain business. Whether it's a suitcase of cash or a consulting fee, it is a federal crime. In the movie, it's a plot point. In a courtroom, it's a felony count. Now, let's look at the Triangle of Death drive. The movie shows David and Efraim dodging bullets, being chased by insurgents, and heroically delivering the guns to the U.S. military base. It is a thrilling sequence. It is also a complete fabrication. Here is the audit of reality. According to court documents and David Pacuz's own testimony, they never drove that truck. They never went to Baghdad. They stayed in the safety of their hotel in Amman, while hired locals took all the risk. This distinction is vital. It reveals the true nature of their business model: risk transfer. They were not soldiers. They were arbitrageurs. They were willing to risk money and other people's lives, but never their own skins. The movie tries to make them look like cowboys. The reality is they were just cowardly middlemen. However, the mechanism of the delivery is accurate in its chaos. The Triangle of Death was real. It was a Sunni-dominated region south of Baghdad that was a slaughterhouse for convoys. The fact that AEY chose to route their shipment through this zone rather than a safer northern route speaks to their prioritization of cost over safety. The northern route was safer but more expensive due to Kurdish taxes. The southern route was deadly but cheap. Efraim chose cheap. This is the price of life calculation on their P&L statement. When the guns finally arrive at the US base, the reception is telling. The captain doesn't care about the customs papers, the bribes, or the near-death experience of the driver. He just wants his guns. This highlights the regulatory failure of the client, the Pentagon. In 2005 to 2006, the demand for weapons was so high that the military effectively turned a blind eye to the provenance of the goods. They prioritized operational readiness over compliance. This success, delivering the Berettas despite the odds, emboldens them. It validates Ephraim's reckless strategy. They realized that if they could pull this off, they could pull off anything. The profit from this deal didn't just buy them better apartments, it bought them a false sense of invincibility. It confirmed their bias that rules are for suckers and that the US government is too big, too slow, and too stupid to catch them. This Beretta deal was the proof of concept for their magnum opus, the Afghan deal. If they could smuggle pistols through Jordan, surely they could source 100 million rounds of AK-47 ammo for the Afghan Army. They were ready to scale up. But as any auditor knows, scaling a flawed business model only accelerates the collapse. They were about to enter the big leagues, where the sharks are bigger and the scrutiny is federal. We have now arrived at the centerpiece of this audit, the Afghan deal. This is the moment AEY Incorporated transitions from a nuisance to a national security threat. The Pentagon issued a solicitation for hundreds of millions of rounds of AK-47 ammunition to arm the Afghan National Army. The contract value was nearly $300 million. Usually, a contract of this magnitude goes to the industry titans. But Efraim Diveroli found a glitch in the matrix. He realized that the major defense contractors were bidding based on manufacturing new ammunition. Manufacturing is expensive. Ephraim's strategy was to scour the Cold War stockpiles of Eastern Europe for surplus ammunition. He wasn't selling a product, he was selling history. He was liquidating the Soviet Union's leftovers. Enter Henry Gerard, played by Bradley Cooper. In the movie, he is a cool, mysterious arms dealer. In our audit, he represents the ultimate beneficial owner of the shadow supply chain. His real-life counterpart is a man named Heinrich Tomet, a Swiss arms dealer who was already on the US government's watch list. This is why he needed AEY. He couldn't bid on the contract himself because he was radioactive. AEY served as his cutout, a clean front to wash the dirty reputation of the supplier. The deal structure was elegant but fragile. AEY would buy the ammo from Albania, which had millions of rounds sitting in bunkers, for pennies on the dollar. They would then resell it to the US government. The profit margin was staggering. They underbid the competition by $50 million and still stood to make $80 million in profit. The Pentagon, blinded by the low price, awarded the contract to two 20-something guys working out of a one-bedroom apartment. This is a catastrophic failure of due diligence. But then, the other shoe drops. Ephraim and David fly to Albania to inspect the goods. They enter a warehouse that stretches as far as the eye can see. It is filled with millions of rounds of 7.62mm ammunition. It looks like a jackpot. But when David opens a crate, the dream collapses. He picks up a metal tin and sees the markings. They are not in Cyrillic, they are in Chinese. This is the material breach moment. Since the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, the United States has maintained a strict arms embargo against China. It is a federal crime to sell Chinese munitions to the US Department of Defense. It doesn't matter that the ammo was sitting in Albania for 30 years. The country of origin is legally China. At this precise moment, AEY is technically bankrupt. They cannot deliver the goods legally, and they cannot back out of the contract without facing criminal fraud charges. A legitimate company would self-report and mitigate the damage. Efraim Diveroli performs a different calculation, a cost-benefit analysis of crime. He realizes that the Chinese markings are only on the packaging, not on the individual bullets. The bullets themselves are generic. So, he devises a solution: repackaging. They hire local Albanian workers to crack open every single wooden crate, remove the metal tins, take out the bullets, and dump them into plain cardboard boxes. No markings, no evidence. In the financial world, we call this laundering the asset. They are physically scrubbing the history off the product. This operation changes the nature of the crime. Before this, they were just negligent. Now, they are engaged in an active conspiracy to defraud the United States government. They are manufacturing false certificates of conformance, swearing that the ammo is Albanian, while simultaneously running a factory floor dedicated to hiding that it is Chinese. The sheer scale of this cover-up is breathtaking. We are talking about 100 million rounds. The logistical cost of repacking reduces their margin, but it keeps the fraud alive. Ephraim justifies it by saying, "It's the same ammo." He argues substance over form. But in government contracting, form is the substance. The paperwork is what you are selling, and every piece of paper they submitted from this point forward was a lie. This creates a massive liability on their books. They are now susceptible to blackmail. The local Albanian mafia, the repackaging teams, the driver, everyone knows the secret. The information asymmetry has shifted. AEY is no longer in control. They are hostages to their own deception. And as we know, secrets in the arms trade have a very short half-life. History teaches us that most financial crimes are not solved by brilliant detective work. They are solved because the criminal gets greedy and refuses to pay a small bill. This is the Al Capone principle. You don't get caught for the murder, you get caught for the tax. For AEY Incorporated, the end didn't come from the CIA or the FBI uncovering the Chinese plot. It came from a disgruntled box manufacturer in Albania. In the movie, his name is Enver. In reality, his name was Kosta Trebitska. He was the man hired to repackage the ammo. Efraim Diveroli, in a final act of hubris, tried to squeeze Kosta out of the deal to save a few cents per box. He refused to pay the man who was literally hiding the evidence of their federal crime. This is a failure of Risk Management 101. When you are committing a felony, you pay your accomplices on time, and you pay them well. Efraim didn't. So, Kosta did what any stiffed contractor would do. He called the New York Times. Enter C.J. Chivers, the legendary war correspondent. He didn't just write a story, he conducted a forensic audit of the ammunition in Afghanistan. He traced the lot numbers back to the Chinese factories. When his article, The Supplier, was published on the front page of the New York Times, the game was over. The movie shows a dramatic raid on the AEY offices. While Hollywood dramatizes the action, the legal reality was a slow, crushing suffocation by the Department of Justice. The 71-count indictment revealed the extent of their fraud. But here lies the most cynical part of our audit, the verdict. You might expect, given the scale of the fraud, selling prohibited Chinese ammunition to the U.S. Army during wartime, that Efraim Diveroli would go away for life. He didn't. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. David Packouz got 7 months of house arrest. Why such light sentences? Because the government was complicit. The Army needed that ammo. The shortage was real. If the Pentagon had inspected the shipment too closely, they would have had to reject it, leaving soldiers on the ground without bullets. The U.S. government was the victim, yes, but they were also the beneficiary of the crime. They prosecuted AEY to save face, not to solve the problem. The movie ends with David Packouz meeting Efraim one last time in an elevator, asking for his cut. Efraim laughs. It's a perfect metaphor for the industry. But the real ending is in the numbers. After his release, Efraim Diveroli went right back into business. David Packouz invented a guitar pedal and became a musician. So, what is the final audit opinion of this case? War Dogs is not just a story about 2 kids who gamed the system. It is a proof of concept that the system is broken by design. The crumbs that Efraim picked up were worth $300 million. The Pentagon continues to outsource war to the lowest bidder, creating a moral hazard where profit incentivizes fraud. The war economy does not care about patriotism. It does not care about the origin of the bullets. It only cares about the transaction. As we close this file, remember the first rule we learned. War is not an event. War is a business. And in this business, business is booming.